So
that's
here we are with another episode.
So that is our opening theme.
That's just how we know. That's how it starts. This is Rocko Jerome.
This is Jeremy Hicks.
And full disclosure, this is the third episode, and we're recording these all at the same time. We're not sure how often they'll come out. We don't know how far removed from the actual events these will be. But we haven't talked for a long time, for any length of time. And it's very nice to catch up. And we have a lot of different subjects to cover. And hopefully this is interesting to someone.
In Twin Peaks, sort of a theme throughout this latest season, this revival season, is it future or is it past?
Right.
So, yeah, these just come out when they come out.
Yeah, right, it's for sure. So anyway, something that I don't want to go so far as to say that I was saddened by, because I think we all knew that it was coming. But a lot of people are like, "Oh, Rocco's going to be really sad." But Hugh Hefner died.
Yes,
at age 92 or 93.
And this is something. This is a man. This is a subject matter that is very important to you. Means a lot to you.
It is indeed, and I think it's one of those things where it sort of defines my life's mission as being a person who defends things that are underrated or misunderstood. And I can't think of anything that is more so than Hefner himself and the Playboy brand that he created.
Well, and let's talk about that. Let's talk about perception versus reality.
Sure. Yeah. Well, okay. So this is sort of one of my big origin stories, right? And this is something that ties into a lot of different things about me that anyone, I would hope, would be able to sort of divine after talking to me or being around me for a while. And it all starts when I was maybe 4th or 5th grade, however old you are at that point, when like 8 or 9, when I was not myself a latchkey kid, but a friend of mine was. And back in those days, you could get on the school bus. You could get on any goddamn bus you wanted. And you could go to another kid's house, and nobody said shit about it. So some strange Reddited kid shows up on the bus. They don't worry about it. I'm going to his house. Okay, come on, get on the bus. So me and another kid went to this third kid's house, and latchkey deal. Mom and dad weren't home for a while because they worked. And go in the house, and one of the kid whose house it was like, my dad's got some Playboys out in the garage.
And how old are you at this point?
I'm 4th or 5th grade.
Okay.
8 or 9. And had never seen an erotic naked woman. Wasn't really sure what nipples were. I knew that I had nipples. I wasn't sure if women did. Didn't know what was going on in the basement. So we run out to the garage with a garbage bag, fill it up with Playboys, and run back to the house like that's in any way inconspicuous. But we're piling around, and we're going to look at these Playboys, right? And I'm expecting wall-to-wall naked chicks. And I'm going to see some things, right? So you go in, and it's like table of contents. Okay, wow. Articles about things that I don't know what they are. Interviews with people that I don't know who they are. Cartoons that are strange about things that I have no idea what they're talking about. Naked woman. Oh, my gosh, look at that. What is that? Oh, man. I feel funny. Oh, man. Yeah, I'm getting the feelings that I'm supposed to get. Let's see what else we got in here. Another picture of the naked woman. Another picture. Okay. Who is this interview with? I don't understand. What are these articles? What is all this? Where are the naked women? Naked woman. Oh, I guess from here on in, it's naked women. Now, you get a centerfold. And then after that, jokes I don't get. Cartoon I don't understand. Right? So what I understood at that time was that this is adult stuff. And when you're ready for this, you will be ready for that. When you can understand the meaning of these articles, when you get the jokes, when you know who the person is that's getting interviewed, when you have the mental capacity to sit and read the interview. Then you will be ready for women. Until then, women will not be interested in you because they're adults and they have fully formed breasts and all that sort of stuff. And something that Hef was fond of saying was that he basically published a literary magazine that had pictures of naked women in it. And, it's for you to decide which one is the baseball cards and which one is the gum. But he could have very easily just published a TNA magazine. There were plenty of those around. And he could have just done that. But he did not. He published something that was very important on a lot of different fronts. He did... one of the main things is the interview, because it was always Q&A format and still is today.
And that of course, was always the running joke with Playboy.
What? The articles?
Yes.
I hate that.
And you're right. I mean, you see these things as a child and you're like, well, more nudity.
Right.
And then you get older and you start actually learning about some of these actors, some of these artists, some of these musicians, and they end up being very candid and profound interviews.
Absolutely.
And then in hindsight, you're like, well, people would joke about this, but
it kills me that that's such a big joke too, because nothing to me says more about how puerile and sort of knee-jerk puritanical Americans are than the joke, articles from people that have never even touched an issue of Playboy magazine.
Well, and let's also remember that, the nudity in Playboy, pretty tame compared to some of their contemporaries.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I studied abroad when I was in graduate school.
Yeah.
Lived in London for a semester.
Right.
A lot of their daily newspapers at the Times would have...
Yeah, page 3, correct?
Would have nudity on the front page.
Yeah, and a lot of it too is that when Playboy was being done, the idea was that it's the girl next door. So while other sort of skin magazines, pornography, I guess, for lack of any other terms for them, would sort of be like sleazy, like these girls are dirty, and look what they do, they get naked.
There was a friend of mine in college who had a subscription to Penthouse, and at the time, I guess just pissing everywhere was the big thing.
Yeah,
And I mean, you would look at that versus like a Playboy,
right?
Yeah, night and day.
And Playboy, especially in the old days, it would be like the only picture of the girl naked would be the centerfold. And the other one, she'd be like, there's somewhere they're wearing like snow clothes, like they're out playing in the snow.
Yeah.
And, the centerfold is kind of like curled up by a fire with their boobs out. And there would be, several paragraphs where they talked about what she was like and what she was into and what she liked about. The idea was that sex is something that's natural. And, along the way, America being America just couldn't seem to handle that. And it was too much for America to be trusted with. Really. But when you look at the people that were interviewed, Martin Luther King, the only long interview with Martin Luther King, Martin Luther King's final statement was written for Playboy before he was killed, and Playboy published it after that. Because Coretta Scott King sent it to Hef and said, run this. Miles Davis, incredibly important Q&A with him. John Lennon, basically his exit interview. John Lennon was murdered on December 8th, 1980. The January 1981 issue of Playboy went to press before that, and it's eerie to see it and to read it and to hold it, because it says, like, John Lennon in our tell-all interview with Yoko Ono. It's like, he's dead. By the time this magazine got anybody's hands, he's dead. And they're talking about him very much like, go buy the new album and see him on tour. Like, he's gone within days.
To follow up real quick on Miles Davis,
yeah.
Hefner himself, huge fan of jazz.
Yes, absolutely.
And really was one of the stewards of jazz.
Yeah, big time.
A huge, a lot of, I'm probably going to butcher this word, philanthropical, help me out here.
Philanthropic
yes,
efforts
made towards the preservation of jazz.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and they would do a yearly jazz poll would be a big thing that was in Playboy. They set up the jazz concert. There'd be a Playboy Jazz Festival thing that happened every year, where like a lot of the greats would all sort of come together and be there at the same time, and it was a big deal. And one of the things that's interesting about that, and that you're bringing that up leads to, is that Hef was very much a product of his time, although there was ways in which he obviously transcended it. And one of the ways that that's manifested in a very benign manner is that Hef wasn't into rock and roll. Hef wasn't into a lot of countercultural things because it just was beyond him. Like, he was sort of very square. He grew up in a very sort of a Puritan household. So to him, like, jazz was about as crazy as he wanted to get as far as any of that kind of stuff is concerned. So, like, if you watch, he had 2 TV shows during the course of the 50s and 60s. And one was called Playboy's Penthouse, which I think is why Penthouse took the name Penthouse, because they wanted to sort of, it's kind of like Cracked and Mad.
Sure.
Like, I think it was like that. Like, they wanted you to kind of like be tricked into buying it.
Yeah.
Initially. But it was very much, it was a black and white show. It was the first integrated TV show in a lot of cases, in a lot of different markets. Nat King Cole would stop by, Sammy Davis would stop by, and he would also have like Miss March would be there in a cocktail dress. And everybody was, dressed well, having a very good time, a lot of cigarettes, drinks, having casual conversations. And it's all centered around, the new songwriters. Kai Coleman comes in and he sings Witchcraft, like, it's like, this was Hef scene, And then at the end of the 60s, that show ran for a couple of years. And at the end of the 60s, they had Playboy After Dark that ran into the 70s. And then it's color all over the place. It's like they have Grand Funk Railroad come on, Ike and Tina come on. And like Hef is just kind of like, oh, well, this is what I got to do to get laid now. So, and that I've never really been too proud of with Hef. I wish that he kind of went ahead and stuck to his guns and said, this is cool for you, but I'm going to do this. But like a lot of guys who wanted to stay relevant, continue to sort of try to hang in, which is where you get things like the Girls Next Door reality show, which I wish he had never done.
Yeah, I was
and all of that sort of stuff, because he wanted to stay in the picture. When I don't think it's an unforgivable sin, but I wish that he had kind of just said like, I'm going to go ahead and hang back, which he did eventually.
Yeah.
And the last couple of years, he has done that. He did that.
That's what I was eventually going to bring up the Girls Next Door, but it sounds like even with Playboy After Dark, that are you saying that you feel like that there was some insincerity on his part?
I wouldn't say insincerity, but it's just the same sort of thing as like somebody that's a little bit too old and a little bit out of touch, kind of trying to hang in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not like, fuck them, go to hell, but it's still just sort of like, knock it off, Grandpa. Like, go ahead and be you. But I mean, like, all these young girls that he would sort of like be involved with, and young women that he would be involved with, who he's like, making them watch, they're 22 years old and he's 88 and he's making them watch Humphrey Bogart movies and stuff. Like, come on, man, like, let it go. Let it go, man.
Yeah, a lot of people had, especially with like the Girls Next Door and stuff, a lot of people had accused him of sort of becoming a parody of himself.
Well, and that's accurate, So, I wish that wasn't so, but I still think that Hef was a very important person. And you can learn a lot from Playboy. And there's a lot of people who think they know, and they really don't know at all, anything at all about what Playboy actually was and what it did. And one of the things, too, that Hef did during 62 to 63, and I think also maybe into 64, was that he had a thing that was running every so often called the Playboy philosophy, where he would sort of say, like, this is what I think about where we should be where it comes to what we now call the LGBTQ community.
Almost kind of an editorial.
Yeah, it was very much an editorial. and that was later put into a book. And you know, like for people that are detractors of Hef and just sort of assume that, I believe that he was sexist. Certainly, I also think everybody that was alive then was sexist. And there's very little culture that you can look at from then, pop or otherwise, that doesn't come across as very sexist. Everything from I Dream of Jeannie to commercials for headache medication. There was always situations where women were clearly treated like second-class citizens and were expected to just take it. And I think Hef was pretty ahead of the curve where that was concerned, even if he wasn't somebody that you would say had it all together by today's metrics. So having said that, I can certainly say that he still did a lot of great stuff over the course of a very short amount of years, that anyone who considers themselves to be a campaigner for social justice would be doing very well to accomplish in an entire lifetime what Hef was able to do in just a few years by interviewing, making sure that certain people get interviewed. He gave Alex Haley his first work. Alex Haley interviewed Miles Davis in the first Playboy interview, which I think was in 1963. Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 was run in Playboy for the first time in monthly installments. That and Playboy and the New Yorker, I think, are the only two publications, major publications, that still publish fiction to this day. And, you know, I just think that the contribution to the world is much more immense than anyone, or most people, seem to have any idea of. I think it's really too bad.
Well, for me, it certainly played a role in my adolescence. Childhood friend, his dad had been subscribing to Playboy since the late 60s, early 70s,
right, yeah.
And their attic was chocked full of them.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, we pretty much had the run of the house as kids. His dad was a blue collar guy. His mom worked, and we'd go there after school. And his parents drank Diet Pepsi, and I'd have my Diet Pepsi and check out Playboy.
Right, that's pretty good.
It was, again, getting older. I mean, it was a big deal back then to have access to that.
Yeah, and
I think
really big deal.
And I think people take that for granted nowadays because porn is so readily available.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a click away nowadays. But then there was something.
It took guile, man. You had to know somebody, or you had to,
and there was something.
Find porn in the woods. You ever found porn in the woods?
Yeah.
Who was putting porn in the woods?
Found nasty stuff in the woods.
Yeah.
The Playboys were nicely tucked away in the attic. The nasty stuff was out in the woods.
Out in the woods, yeah, right.
Somebody had ripped it out of somebody's magazine. It had been folded multiple times and stuffed in some tin can that used to have cookies in it.
Yeah, I remember a kid gave me some porn, and he was like, "I don't like this anymore." I've been looking at this for too long, and I don't like it anymore. You can have it. Yeah, I always thought that was a funny, kind of like the monkey's paw kind of a situation.
I mean, was there anything that was strange about it?
No.
Or it was just...
It wasn't good, but it was
done with
good
it.
enough.
Okay.
But
yeah, there was something forbidden about looking at those magazines.
Yeah,
there was just like again, growing up having HBO, catching HBO late at night.
Sure,
it's like you're not supposed to be looking at this, but you can't look away.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Well, and something that just occurred to me is that most magazines, they don't keep them; they throw them away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not that many collectors of Time and Newsweek, which are also magazines that I have an affinity for. But Playboy, people kept those. Almost like it was one, they wanted to keep them, and two, they were they didn't want to throw them out. They didn't want somebody to see it in the trash. You know what I mean? That's kind of contraband. You just don't just throw naked
Right.
Pictures of women out where the trash man gets it. You know what I mean? So like,
like that's one of those
whole
Playboy
different
houses.
deal. Yeah. And you know, like I go to one of those Playboy houses. I remember when I was a younger kid, we had a next door neighbor who were keeping their mail, and they were kind of like questionable people, at least by my mom and dad's estimation. And an issue of Playboy came, and I remember being like, "They're dirty." He's getting Playboy. And of course, I hadn't opened one, and it was still in the plastic, so I didn't get to see. You know.
Well, I remember, there was a perception issue
Sure.
of men who read Playboy that were married.
Yeah.
You know, it was almost like, how could his wife allow him to look at that?
Yeah, America's a mixed up place, man.
It really is.
Really, really a lot of problems, and this is where a lot of them come from.
So, do you ultimately feel like that Playboy helped destigmatize sex?
I mean, it's hard to say, you know. It really is. It really is hard to say, because it seems like that it almost just kind of became part of the problem. You know what I mean? And something that I've always thought about too, and talked about here and there, is that if you look at the way that things were going in the 70s, and a lot of this was like disco and maybe even cocaine a little bit too, and definitely the pill, was there was sort of becoming this idea that like, yeah, you know, like let's go ahead and be sexy and let's go with it. Let's go ahead and just sort of like adults do this. Key parties, adult stuff. Nothing about kids. Kids are kids, right?
Right.
Kids reach age of 21. Until then, they're kids. You know what I mean? They go and ride bikes, whatever. Girls wear pigtails, whatever. They're kids. And, you know, I wasn't there to experience it firsthand because I was born in 1978. But looking at culture and looking at advertising especially, which I think can always really tell you a lot about what's going on at any given time, is to look at the advertising from that time. I feel like there was this real situation where it was becoming a much more healthy society when it came to those matters, right? And then there was AIDS. And I definitely know what that was like, being a kid during that time, where it's like, you will die. You're going to fucking die. Like, you're going to have bleeding sores all over your body, and people are going to know, and they're going to think you're the scum of the earth, and you're going to die, and it's fucking biblical. And it's God making us pay for the way that we were. And so that all came roaring back, right? And then after that, I feel like there was a lot of time during the 80s that was sort of asexual. You know what I mean? Like, if you watch like TV shows at the time, it all became about families again. And like, you know, like women would wear those big shoulder pads, you know, and big hair. And something I'm always struck by, if you watch like 80s television too, is that young women look much older. Like, they would wear makeup and stuff that was sort of like older woman stuff.
Like, can you give me an example?
Like in a lot of movies. Like, I remember like in Gremlins, like the girl in Gremlins.
Okay.
Right? Who I think was Phoebe Cates.
Okay.
Right? Who was like a sex panther in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. But then in Gremlins, like, you know, she's dressed like somebody's mom. And it's sort of like, it was a weird time for that. I think the people got kind of jumbled up. And I think that AIDS had a lot to do with it.
Interesting.
And then I think as we got into the 90s, we got into like this whole like more of a dirty thing. And you get stuff like Britney Spears, where you're sort of sexualizing people that are a little bit too young to really know what's going on, you know? And I think that we've moved away from the validity and the importance of adults and aspiring to be an adult and what it means to embrace adulthood and enjoy adulthood. Like, you're not supposed to anymore. You're supposed to be as much like a kid as possible all of your life.
I mean, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because, you know, for me, I think you and I differ in some ways when it comes to this, but I think that that you have you're a nostalgic man. You know, you have an affinity for the past. You're not one of those. You're not Al Bundy who can't get past his high school football days. I'm not saying that that's the case.
It's less to do with personal nostalgia. It has to do with things that happened before I was around to experience them firsthand.
It's these sort of timeless qualities, and I think most people who are nostalgic for things are the exact opposite of that. Like, I don't know about you, but, getting older and seeing old friends, sometimes I'll get together with people and all they want to talk about was, like, every sentence starts out with, you remember that time? Uh-huh. And Chris Rock actually has a bit about this, and I can't remember what album it's from, but he's basically hating on people who are nostalgic. And he's like, something like, you remember that time? And he's like, yeah, I remember that fucking time. He's like, get some news stories.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so it can be difficult at times to separate the two and have an appreciation for the past while trying to incorporate those same things into the future.
Right. Yeah.
And so I guess my question with that is that it sounds like that you have kept up with Playboy.
I have, yeah. I've had a subscription since I've had an address.
So I have not. You know, this is a very specific period of my life that we're talking about with me and Playboy.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about, we've talked about the origins of the magazine.
Yeah.
Really, what has been going on with Playboy for the last 15, 20 years?
Well, like all print media, it's not doing as hot as it once was. And what happened with Playboy was that during the 80s, there was many attempts to kill it. It went from being a magazine that you could buy at a place that sold magazines to being something that was in a black wrapper that was only at certain gas stations and bookstores. And it really changed the way that it was distributed. And there was a few scandals that Hef was unfortunately embroiled in that weren't really his fault. He's never been a big drug guy. One of the things that they always say about Hef is that he had a pool, but he didn't swim. And he had a full bar, but he didn't drink. And he had all the drugs, but he didn't take them. Like he was sort of a Gatsby-esque character in those ways. But there were some things that happened where a personal assistant of his and one of his main people was this woman who was embroiled in some sort of a deal with her boyfriend, was a big cocaine dealer. And once the CIA figured out that would lead back to Hef, they really went after her because they could implicate Playboy in that. And they were a little bit more successful in that than they probably should have been. So Hef stepped back and he wasn't really involved much in the day-to-day. His daughter took over, Christy Hefner. And he was still sort of like nominally involved here and there. And, there was the period where it became very airbrushed, and you had like Anna Nicole Smith, and there was like, constant tributes to Marilyn Monroe and all that sort of thing where, again, it sort of goes back to Hef being out of touch.
Yeah.
The interviews were always great, and there was always great articles, and there was always interesting stuff. But the thing that most people know it for, unfortunately, got pretty far away from that girl next door kind of ideal. And then it seems like in the last maybe 5 years or so, they had been trying to sort of find ways to make it a little bit different, make it a little bit more hip here and there. And some of those attempts I thought were pretty great.
And this was, a lot of these attempts were spearheaded by his son?
Yeah, that's right. Cooper Hefner.
Yeah.
And there's actually two sons, Cooper and then his older brother, I think, Marston, who was involved with a woman named Claire Sinclair, who was Playmate of the Year, I think 2009 or so. And there was a domestic abuse thing that happened, and he was written out. And
really?
I don't think Hef had anything to do with him after that. He was like, this is counter to everything that we stand for. You're out of the family business.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know what ended up happening with Marston. And the thing was those kids, Christy, the older daughter, he was not really around much because that was the wife that he was with when he started the magazine.
Yeah.
And then once the magazine was in swing, he was like, I don't want to be this guy. So very shitty of him to do that. Again, I don't want to put him, he's neither to be lionized or demonized. He was a guy. He did something that was very important to me and a lot of other people and should be considered a big deal culturally, but, he's not God. Anyway, he had the older daughter, and then he had the two younger kids later in life. And although he was not with the woman that was their mother, she lived in the house next door, and they sort of all took a hand in raising the kids. So Cooper and Marston, they knew their dad really well.
Yeah.
And had a very interesting upbringing, as you can imagine. So Cooper has sort of slowly but surely been taking control of the magazine. And one of the things that he said recently was the fuzzy dice era of Playboy is over. We're not doing that anymore. Like, we're getting away from the neon shit. We're trying to be more of something of substance. So the big thing that ended up happening was, I guess it's been about a year or two now, they had the thing where there was no more nudes in Playboy.
Okay.
You remember that,
yeah.
right? And that, of course, led to a lot of jokes and a lot of people like, oh, what's anybody even going to bet for anymore? There's no nudes in there. It don't make any goddamn sense. But what happened was, it wasn't like they just took Playboy and they no longer have nudes. They changed the format of the magazine. They made it a little bit more like what it had been in the 60s as far as how it felt. What do you got? They changed the quality of the paper. They changed the layout. They changed a lot of the content around. They've basically fired all the old cartoonists who were good, but they were very dated at that point.
Sure.
And they're all living comfortably, so there's no reason to worry about. They're all older guys too, so they're fine. And just started to sort of make it like something that would be a contemporary version of exactly what it used to be. And the fact that they didn't have nipples or frontal nudity anymore meant that they could sell it at Barnes & Noble by the cash register. And that is why they did that, which was, it's funny to me how many people don't understand marketing and just what makes capitalism work. Because all you had to do was go to a store that sold magazines and you could plainly see why they quit having nudes in Playboy.
Sure.
Because it had been in the black wrapper up in the corner.
Right.
Or you weren't even likely to look if you didn't know what you were looking for, to being something that was in the front of the store by the cash register in a big news story. So I don't know how well it sold, but it was a big deal, obviously.
Yeah.
No, and then once Cooper sort of took on more control over the brand and over the magazine itself, they kept all of the new format changes, but they went ahead and put the nipples and the frontal nudity back in. And it's funny how much it's just like, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? The women that are in there now, they're usually not really like professional models, or in a lot of cases, like it used to be that like during the 90s, especially, like a lot of the women that would end up in Playboy were basically porn stars who did like a cleanish thing with Playboy and then went on to do other stuff. And they were kind of in this universe of just women that had boob jobs that were apt to be in Playboy. And Cooper has changed that. So I'm very happy with what the publication is like now.
So it sounds like it's gone back to its roots.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. And I think,
but with a contemporary feel.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Like I'm obviously a huge nostalgia wonk, but I feel like in this case, this is something that I think anybody that has good taste would be able to comprehend.
I'm curious about something. Anywhere along the way, say, I don't know, 90s, 2000s, did they ever strive to be more pornographic? Did they ever try and keep up with any of their rivals?
Not really.
Okay. I was curious about that.
In the early going, so when it started to become a thing where they were going to show Bush, there was other magazines that were really going for it. And there was a lot of pressure, and Hef was always, for the people that knew him, they knew that Hef was like an old guy. He wants to go listen to Glenn Miller, and he's sort of out of touch with a lot of things, but it's like, these other magazines are selling a lot better and they're showing some stuff. But it was one of those deals where it's something that I've always said about buildings. If a building can live past that 30 to 40 year period where the building is 30 or 40 years old, it can then become timeless and stylish and classic and an antique. Same with a car. But if it doesn't, then it doesn't. Tear it down, build something new. And I think Playboy sort of like had to survive that to the point where it was like, yeah, we're not going to ever do that. Like we thought about it. Now we know we don't ever need to do that.
Well, do you think it survived that? And are you optimistic for its future?
Well, I mean, it did survive. It still exists.
Well, I guess what I mean by that is by survive, I mean still relevant.
Is it still relevant and thriving? Yeah, I think what hurt it more was that it got lumped into pornography, right? When it was no longer just a magazine with naked women, and it got because that wasn't always the case. There was a point where American society hadn't quite made up their minds yet about how they felt about this magazine on the block, So I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's funny because, I don't want to talk too much about what my day-to-day is because I don't want it to anyway be what we're doing here, be tied to that. But one of the things that I do is distribute a local magazine. Mm-hmm. And we have a print run of 25,000 around the city of Louisville, which is not a big city. That is a high number, but we go through it in about 2 weeks. And I think Playboy has a print run of about 100,000 nationally.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is also the case with like Spider-Man. Spider-Man has a print run of 90,000.
That's it?
That's it. All around the country. So, I don't know. I mean, it's print has definitely had to change. I mean, we used to have really thick magazines. We don't have those anymore. The advertising has certainly changed, the tenor of it.
So with Spider-Man, obviously,
yeah.
you can get that digitally. Same with
sure.
Playboy?
Yeah, there's a digital version. Yeah. One of the things that they have with Playboy is that you can go in and you can see every Playboy ever digitally.
Really? So they've got the archives?
Yeah.
Well, that'd be cool.
Yeah. So you can go and read any interview, The interviews, to me especially, if you were to take every interview ever, I mean, you would have such a catalog of just such a wide variety of different people and a real deep probing kind of a thing. One of the things that I always talk about here is Frank Sinatra. There was an article about Frank Sinatra that was done by a guy who I think his name was Gay Talese. I think I said that right. I may not have, but it was for Esquire.
Okay.
And it was called Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. And this guy, Gay, spent a week or two with Frank Sinatra during a period that could be described as his sort of midlife crisis period, where he had been irrelevant for a while and he was kind of on his way back to doing things that were big. This is kind of like going into the Rat Pack era.
Okay.
And he had a cold, and it meant that his voice was off, and he was mad about it. He was taking it out on everybody. And this guy, Gay, he sort of like wrote a little short story, a little almost like a novelette about Frank Sinatra, right? And what he is to America, who he is as a man. Heavy stuff, and it was good. Around the same time, there is a Q&A in Playboy with Frank Sinatra. I don't know who the author was of that, but somebody who knew Frank Sinatra's work sat down with him and talked to him at length. And if you read both of those, I think the one that's more telling and the one that gives you a better idea of who Frank Sinatra really was is the one in Playboy. And I mean, they hit upon things like religion, and like Frank kind of came out as an atheist in this. Like, that's a big deal.
Oh, yeah. Especially during this time period.
Right. So then since then, that really changed the way that Esquire and a lot of magazines, but especially Esquire, handled their interviews. Esquire is a pretty cool magazine too. I don't like it nearly as much as Playboy, but Esquire, if you look at the interviews with anybody, they're almost always worthless because it's some author who's trying to get themselves over as a big deal and trying to make themselves the subject of the story. But not everybody can be gay.
Yeah.
And not everybody can be gay to least. So, trying to tell about I'm trying to think of somebody lame. That's easy to just throw out there. The one that got everybody mad was there was one where this woman did an interview with Chris Evans, right? The Captain America guy.
Yeah.
And she was like, I think we may have fallen in love. And like the story was about like how they went camping together and all this stuff. And it's like, wow, like just do a Q&A. Let the guy talk. Let him be who he is instead of sending somebody that wants to try to like get themselves over as the next big, half-assed novelist. So to me, the Q&A, and it's funny how that has to be such a hard thing for so many people to understand.
A lot of people blame Hunter S. Thompson for that.
Yeah, well,
a lot of people, blame Thompson for this whole, not being able to separate yourself from your story.
Right. Well, if the story is about a person of note who you're doing an interview with, that's who I want to get the word from.
No,
you know what I mean?
I agree with you, and I mean even going back to my broadcasting days, I don't know. It never entered my mind to try and upsurp the person that I was interviewing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
right.
it's like the story is the story.
You want to do everything but that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What an asshole this lady taking Chris Evans came.
Right, and it's not just her. I mean, it's everybody. I mean, every time I read one of those things in Esquire, and it's one of those times where sometimes it's like somebody I'm really interested in reading about. And I'll get sucked into it, and then I'm like halfway through, and I'm like, God damn it! Now you're telling me what you had for breakfast. Like, what are you doing? Why can't you just ask them questions and let them answer it and tell me what exactly they said? So I don't know. If for that alone, Playboy has made a massive contribution to the world.
Lastly, is it still released monthly?
You know what? Now it comes out more. Sometimes it comes out every month, and then sometimes it comes out every 2 months.
So it's like our podcast. It just
who knows when it's coming out.
It just comes out when
they
it comes
know
out.
Though. Like they do like they have like the September October issue, but I think there'll be a November and then a December, and then there'll be like a January February. So I can't quite figure it out because it just kind of comes when it comes. But it seems like it's 6 months out of the year that they've decided which it comes out monthly, and then
sadly, it sounds like some of the comics I read. It just
Yeah, dude. I mean, people don't really get that anymore. If you try to tell them, comics used to come out every month, no matter what.
Yeah.
Like they said, you remember in the letters pages of Marvel Comics, especially that say "see you in 30 days."
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like they put a marker on it.
It must well just say "see you when we see you."
Yeah.
Now.
Right. Yeah.
It can be frustrating sometimes as a reader. It really
can be. It can be. Yeah. I actually had to unfollow Francis Francavilla. I was following him on Twitter.
Oh yeah.
And I'm a fan. I'm a big fan of his work. I think it's great.
Same here.
And he posts all this shit that he did for no other reason than to post it on Twitter. He's just drawing shit, posting on Twitter. And I was rereading Black Beetle, which is a really good series. And they were talking about how there might be a new Black Beetle coming out. It still hasn't come out. It's been a year. But I went back and I reread the original Black Beetle, like getting warmed up. And it was from like 2010, whenever. And at the end it says, Black Beetle returns spring of 2013. Right? And I was just like, man, and I was getting to the point where like he'll post on Twitter sometimes, he'll say like, God, deadlines are so hard. And I actually commented and said, when they're not so hard? When you actually do the work instead of post shit on Twitter. I want to give you money.
Yeah.
Do your shit. Are you rich? What's the deal? Where is your money coming from?
Now you've probably heard me complain about. I'm a big fan of this Chilling Adventures of Sabrina comic.
Yeah, right.
And
which was an offshoot, of course.
Yeah.
Of
Afterlife with Archie. Yeah. And
Frankenvilla's doing the art for.
Yeah, and same guy writes them both.
Yeah.
The guy who is instrumental in the Riverdale show.
Yes, which is where the money's coming in now.
Yeah,
and
a lot of money so Robert Hack is the artist on Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Love it. It's a beautiful book. Really surprised at how much I've gotten into horror comics as I've gotten older. But anyway, the point of the story is that they have had 2 issues out in 13 months.
Yeah.
It's so there's so much good stuff out there. It's really hard to stick with something.
It makes you mad
if they're going to take a fucking 11-month hiatus.
Yeah, Frankavilla, and it puts you in a weird headspace. Frankavilla is doing a Spirit book, Will Eisner's Spirit.
Yeah,
which is something I'm very fond of, and it's pretty good. But issue 4, I think, just came out, and we're like a good year into this. And when I got it, I was like, hopefully this is the last one. And I was reading it, and halfway through, I was like, I hope this is the last one. And I looked at the back to just look at the back page, and it says to be concluded. And I'm like, fuck. All right. I'm going to forget all of this. I'm reading this for no reason now. And I finish reading it. It just makes you, it just fucks with your perception of this art.
Well, I
think storytelling.
Yeah, and
when it makes you mad when it's going to come out or not come out or whatever,
And I think you're like me, that you still prefer individual issues.
I'm getting to where I'm getting closer to the point where I'm going to be more and more trades, I think.
Okay, well, I'm not there, but I'm glad to. I'm happy for you.
One is just the monetary investment is so much less if you do trades.
Well, not only that, but I couldn't tell you how often I'll be reading something and it will be 2 or 3 months or longer sometimes before the next issue comes out, and I have to skim the issue from months ago.
I got to do more than skim. I forget everything.
Just to be able to recall what happened. And I think to myself, why am I not just reading this in trade?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. I would dare say that I'm getting to the point where if it's a book where I can't remember the last thing that happened, I'm not going to keep buying them.
Yeah.
If I care enough, I'll get the trade.
Yeah.
Or I'll just abort mission, So, and also, there was a lot of situations where, one, I wanted to support Doug at Comic Book World when he was still there.
Yeah.
And then, 2, you want to support that actual book if you feel like it makes a difference. You know what I mean? There was a great Nick Fury book it's done now.
Just ended recently with issue 6, right?
Yeah, they did 6 of those.
Yeah.
And it was written by James Robinson, and the art was, I don't know if it's Echo or ACO. I've never been able to figure out what you're supposed to call the guy. But it was great, and I loved it. And I knew it wasn't long for this world. There was no way I wasn't going to buy those as they were coming out because I wanted to support it. I wanted the numbers to show somebody's buying it,
Yeah.
Plus, those were one-shots. I'm more inclined to do that, too. If I can buy a comic and the story is fully told in that issue, that, to me, is a really valuable thing.
And so few comics can stand on their own these days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, I love a great epic story, but at the same time, it would be nice to just be able to open a comic, read it from beginning to end, and that be it.
It's great, yeah. And everything is sort of designed now for that trade paperback market anyway.
Yeah.
So it's just incubator ideas for movies at this point. You know what I mean?
I have a feeling that this is something we'll revisit in a later episode. And,
absolutely.
And we'll there's definitely a lot to discuss there.
Yeah.
So anything you want to add about Hef?
No, I think I pretty well covered it.
All right.
I'm sorry that he's gone. If you think you know what Playboy is, I would advise you to go ahead and Google the Playboy interview and then put in the name of anybody that you're interested in, because they probably talked to Playboy and they probably have a very insightful interview for you to read.
All right. Well, until next time.
Absolutely.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Later.